He had no magic in a world built entirely on it. And one day, the strongest swordsman in the kingdom would kneel to him anyway. He died first, quietly, stupidly. Ice, a curb, a cracked skull. No sword fight, no glory, just cold pavement and a colder sky. His last thought was simple. He had never done anything great. Then darkness swallowed him whole. Then a scream tore out of his own newborn throat. He was alive again. No system, no glowing interface, no memories he could summon on command. Just a baby in a farmer's house on the edge of nowhere. They named him Theo Rice. Youngest son, smallest voice, lowest rank before he could even walk. In this world, magic decided everything. Every child faced the same ritual at age 7, the rite of awakening. A priest would call to their soul, and an element would answer. Fire, water, earth, air, light, darkness. Theo's turn came. The priest called. Nothing answered. He called again. Silence. A third time. Still nothing. The boy has no magic core, the old priest finally admitted. A crowd of neighbors went quiet, and in that quiet Theo heard exactly what he was worth to them. Someone in the back muttered that he was useless, and no one corrected them. Theo stood there with his small fist clenched, and something cold and stubborn lit up inside him. He had no magic. Fine. He would build a body that didn't need any. The years crawled by, and the taunts crawled with them. The other children called him empty, like it was a fact of nature. The adults pitied him quietly, the way people pity something already decided. His father, a practical man, quietly hoped his son would just accept the farm and stop dreaming. Then a traveling merchant passed through the village, and everything changed in one conversation. By the campfire that night, the merchant spoke of a place called the Academy of Blade and Flame. The best fighters on the continent trained there, he said. Not just mages, swordsmen too. There was a whole department for warriors who fought with nothing but steel and nerve. They train people there who can cut down an archmage barehanded, the merchant said. Theo listened with a hunger he didn't know he still had. A place where magic wasn't required. A door he never dared imagine existed. Thousands apply, the merchant warned. Peasant children barely make it past the gate. Something ignited in Theo that had nothing to do with any element at all. If he had no magic, he would become stronger than every mage using only his own hands. From that night forward, his life stopped being ordinary. At 12 years old, he trained with an intensity that unsettled even his own family. He woke 2 hours before dawn and ran mountain trails with a sack of stones strapped to his back. He turned every farm chore into a punishment for his own weakness. He carried water in barrels instead of buckets, and chopped wood with a blunted sword instead of an axe. You'll break your back, his father warned him one evening. Then I'll grow stronger, Theo answered, and kept swinging. At night, while the house slept, he studied old fencing manuals he traded months of labor to own. No teacher, no guidance, just trial, error, and blood on the pages. The first year gave him almost nothing back. Sore muscles, cracked palms, no visible progress. Still, he didn't stop. By 13, he could run 10 kilometers under a full load without breaking stride. By 14, his arms held a wooden sword steady longer than any grown fighter in the village. By 15, his strikes were splitting planks that meant twice his size couldn't crack. A retired soldier passed through one day and stopped cold at the sight of him training. Who's pushing you this hard? The old soldier asked. Myself, Theo answered, barely catching his breath. The soldier studied him for a long moment, then smiled like he'd seen something rare. You're either a genius or you're trying to destroy yourself, he said. I have no magic, Theo told him. My body is the only weapon I get. The old soldier, a man named Gar, offered to teach him what little he still remembered. That was how Theo got his first real teacher, a one-armed veteran instead of a noble mentor. Forget the pretty books, Gar told him on day 1. Fighting is about who survives the first mistake. Gar fought him with a single hand and knocked him down again and again without mercy. Your stance is open. You're watching the blade instead of the eyes. You rely on force, not precision. Theo fell dozens of times in a single session, and every fall taught him something new. 6 months later, he lasted a full minute against Gar for the first time. A year after that, he started reading Gar's movements before they happened. 2 years in, something happened that nobody in that village expected. At 16, Theo forced the one-armed veteran to actually take a step back. Looks like the student passed the teacher, Gar laughed, rubbing his shoulder. You're just tired, Theo said, though pride burned quietly in his chest. Maybe, Gar said. Or maybe you're ready for something bigger than this village. Fate didn't wait for him to feel ready. When Theo turned 17, 10 armed outlaws rode into the village looking for an easy target. Gar couldn't fight at full strength. The other men scattered in panic. Theo stepped out alone, a heavy training sword in his hands, and planted himself in front of his home. The kid wants to play hero, the scarred gang leader sneered, and two men charged at once. Theo sidestepped the first swing exactly the way Gar had drilled into him 1,000 times. He used the man's own momentum against him and dropped him with the hilt of his sword. The second thug swung wide. Theo cut across his arm, and the weapon hit the dirt. The leader charged in himself now, furious, wielding two short blades with real skill. This was the first opponent who had actually trained to kill. A blade opened Theo's shoulder. Another cut across his thigh. The pain screamed at him. He didn't listen to it. He read the hands instead of the pain. The leader lunged for his throat. Theo dodged by a hair and answered with everything he had. One strike, bottom to top, through the exposed side. The leader dropped. The rest of the thugs fled without looking back. Theo stood alone in the square, drenched in blood that wasn't only his own. For the first time, he didn't feel pride. He felt a cold, clear warning. Out there, past this village, his enemies would only get stronger. Word of the sword-wielding farm boy spread through the region within days. Gar finally said the words Theo had been waiting years to hear. You're ready. Tryouts for the academy happen once a year, deep in the capital city of Waldheim. Theo left on foot with only his sword, a little food, and his father's blessing. Nobles train their children from birth for this, his father warned him at the gate. That's exactly why I have to be better, Theo said. Not through talent, through work. Every stop on the road became a training session in disguise. On a forest trail, he crossed paths with a wyvern terrorizing merchant caravans. Grown guards were too afraid to approach the creature at all. Theo watched it for a few minutes and noticed something everyone else had missed. A pattern. It always attacked from the same direction, hunting by scent against the wind. When it lunged, he didn't meet it head-on. He struck from the side, into the wing joint. One precise blow, sharpened by years of pointless farm labor, and the wyvern went down screaming. Merchants told that story in every tavern between the forest and the capital gates. Waldheim greeted him with noise, wealth, and thousands of rivals from every corner of the kingdom. Nobles arrived on expensive horses. Mage students wore amulets of power. Warrior heirs carried ancestral blades. Theo, in plain peasant clothes with a battered sword, looked almost like a joke among them. A peasant thinks he's becoming a swordsman. One noble laughed, surrounded by his little crowd. Theo didn't answer. He had long since stopped spending energy on empty noise. The trial had 3 stages: endurance, technique, and a final duel against a real instructor. The endurance course, a loaded run through obstacles, felt almost easy after years of sandbags and hills. The technique stage revealed strikes with shocking power for someone with no formal training at all. His final opponent was Instructor Roland, a veteran famous for ending most fights in seconds. A peasant boy, Roland said, studying him with genuine professional interest. Let's see what you've learned alone. The crowd expected a quick, humiliating finish. Instead, Theo moved with the calm of someone who had survived real violence, not just drills. He parried the first strike, slipped the second, and answered the third with a counter of his own. Not bad for a peasant, Roland admitted, without a trace of mockery left in his voice. 15 minutes in, past the point where most challengers would have collapsed, Roland finally overextended. Theo saw the opening and took it without hesitation. One sharp lunge disarmed the instructor completely, and the blade came to rest against his throat. The stands erupted. Roland looked at the boy in front of him with real respect. "What's your name?" Roland asked, still catching his breath. "Theo Rice," he answered simply. "Remember it," Roland told the other examiners. "The whole kingdom is going to be saying it soon." Theo Rice, a farmer's son with no magic and no name worth mentioning, enrolled with the top score. That was only the beginning of everything waiting for him inside those walls. The academy turned out to be a small city on its own, walled off and thick with rivalry. Future commanders, mages, and duelists studied here, which meant every hallway was already a battlefield. "Welcome to the academy," the first-year advisor announced, his voice flat and cold. "You get stronger, or you disappear." Some students smiled nervously at that. Others straightened their backs with pride. Theo just listened. Before proving strength, you first had to survive other people's arrogance. He was placed in the shared dormitory of the sword faculty, a bed, a desk, a weapon rack. His window looked straight out onto the training ground, and he took it as a good sign. He set his sword down and let himself smile for one brief moment. Now the real work begins. The sword faculty split into invisible tiers almost immediately. Nobles raised by private tutors moved like the world owed them room to breathe. Magically gifted students had joined close combat by choice, not by lack of talent. And then there were the rare ones, like Theo, unremarkable until the moment they weren't. Eric Vane, heir to the Northern Ducal House, found him first at the weapons counter. "Are you the peasant everyone's been gossiping about?" he asked, sizing Theo up. "If you're asking whether I have a name, yes. If you're asking whether you should remember it, no." Soft laughter rippled around them. "Amusing," Eric said. "We'll see after your first sparring session." "We'll see," Theo said back, calm in a way that annoyed Eric far more than anger would have. The first real spar came 3 days later, against a young noble named Darren Holt. "Don't break too fast," Darren smirked, raising his blade. "I'll try to make it quick." Darren struck first, fast and technically flawless. The kind of strike meant to intimidate on contact. Theo didn't read it as a threat. He read it as a pattern, and he stepped through it. A shoulder shift, a twist of the torso, and Darren's blade cut only empty air. Theo touched his wrist with the flat of his blade before Darren even understood what happened. Darren pushed harder, faster, more aggressive. But speed built on unquestioned confidence has a weakness. Theo lived on doubt. Every bruise from the farm had made him sharper than these gifted boys. On the 6th exchange, Darren overextended, and Theo knocked the sword clean out of his hands. The room went silent in a way that felt almost physical. Word spread through the dormitory by nightfall, and not all of it was kind. "Peasants don't fight like that," someone whispered. "He must be cheating somehow." Theo let the noise pass through him without landing. He trained himself for that too. Late that night, a knock came at his door. It was Master Siren, the combat theory instructor. "Your technique isn't from any kingdom school," Siren said, studying the sword on the wall. "I taught myself," Theo answered. "Self-taught fighters are usually mediocre," Siren replied. "You're the other kind. They'll test more than your strength here," Siren warned him quietly. "They'll test your will." "I'm ready," Theo said, and Siren studied him a moment longer before nodding once. "Then you might survive." A week later came the placement trials, an obstacle course carved along the forest edge. The goal wasn't just to finish. It was to arrive still combat-ready. Some students burned through their strength too fast, chasing a flashy finish that never came. Theo moved with cold, deliberate pacing, calculating every risk before he committed to it. When a bridge collapsed ahead of him, he didn't panic. He simply found the angle around it. When training golems burst from the tree line, he forced them into a bottleneck to collide with each other. When another student collapsed ahead of him, Theo dragged him forward without breaking his own rhythm. "Who is that guy?" one instructor muttered at the finish line. "The one who never wastes energy," another answered. "That's rare." Theo didn't feel like a hero. He was just relieved his body had held together. Rumors about him grew instead of fading. And one evening he wandered into the old restricted library. Behind a hidden shelf, he found a training sword unlike anything he'd ever held. Black as scorched iron, faint silver veins running through the metal. Impossibly light and impossibly heavy at once. "Not a bad choice," said a voice behind him. It was Siren again. "This blade has no true name," Siren explained. "Some believe whoever masters it can break any style alive." "It doesn't grant power," Siren said. "It reveals exactly how much pressure its wielder can survive." Many who tried it broke, not physically, but somewhere deeper in the mind itself. "What do you want from me?" Theo asked, running his fingers along the black surface. "Nothing," Siren said. "But if you can use it correctly, it might change everything about your path." "Then I'll give it a try," Theo said firmly, and something in the room seemed to shift. The first internal tournament arrived, and by lottery, Theo drew Eric Vane once again. This time enrollment in the advanced group hung on the result, not just pride. "I hope you're ready to lose with some dignity," Eric said, stepping into the arena in new armor. Theo didn't answer. In his hands was no ordinary blade now. It was the black training sword. Eric had studied his style since the last defeat, hunting specifically for weaknesses to shut down. The first minutes went badly for Theo, driven backward under a wall of heavy, precise blows. One strike opened his shoulder wide. Blood soaked through the fabric fast. The crowd gasped. Theo gritted his teeth and refused to give the pain a single inch. This was the real test, not when things were easy, but when his body begged him to quit. He shifted his pace, faked a stumble, and Eric lunged forward certain of victory. Then Theo used something new, a technique built from every principle he'd bled for over the years. He cut off the angle of attack and drove a sharp counter along its exact trajectory. Eric's sword sliced empty air. His balance broke for one single, fatal second. Theo drove his shoulder in, knocked him flat, and pressed the black blade to his throat. The arena erupted into noise. Eric lay there, staring up at him like he'd never truly seen him before. Victory came at a price. Theo's shoulder throbbed so badly he could barely raise it. And yet what he felt wasn't weakness. It was clarity, sharp and undeniable. After that fight, No one at the academy called him a country upstart again. Even those who despised him were forced to admit it out loud. This guy grows faster than anyone expects. Siren pulled him aside afterward. You still want to reach the top? He asked. I don't just want to, Theo said, staring out at the training field. I need to. Why? Siren asked quietly. Because people like me get looked down on, Theo said. I want that to end. That's a good answer, Siren warned, but a dangerous one. It can curdle into revenge if you're not careful. I don't want revenge, Theo said. Then listen to your own heart, Siren told him. The strongest swordsman isn't the one who beats everyone. It's the one who never loses himself. That night, an alarm bell tore through the academy grounds without warning. Fireballs lit the sky above the outer wall as unknown militants launched a full assault on the gates. This wasn't hooliganism. Someone was testing the academy's defenses in earnest. Everyone to the walls, an instructor screamed, and Theo grabbed his sword and ran. 3 creatures resembling wolves, horned, red-eyed, and enormous, were tearing through the right wing already. This isn't a drill, is it? Eric asked, his face draining of color. No, Theo said. And if we don't hold together right now, they'll wipe us all out. On the wall, he faced a masked mercenary armed with a narrow saber and no hesitation at all. Theo parried, pushed him back, and answered with 3 moves in a single breath. The man went flying toward the parapet, but more were already closing in behind him. This wasn't a duel anymore. This was holding an entire section of wall alone. He noticed the enemy attacking in rhythm, one distracting, one striking low, one covering retreat. False center, he shouted to the students nearby. They want us bunched in the middle. Hold the flanks. For the first time, younger students obeyed him instantly, because he wasn't loud, he was precise. On the roof of the main building, an enemy commander in dark armor broke through the defenses. Magical enhancements crackled along his hands, and his strength dwarfed any ordinary mercenary. You're too young to be standing on this roof, the man said, closing the distance fast. And you're too confident to notice you already lost, Theo answered. The first blow came down like a hammer. Theo dodged, but the blade still opened his ribs. This man fought like a battering ram, relying on brute superiority to overwhelm every opponent. Then Theo did the one thing no one expected. He charged straight into the danger. He slipped under the next swing, drove his shoulder into the man's chest, and broke his footing. One quick slash severed the arm, channeling the magical enhancement. The glow died instantly. Theo ended it with a single lunge, disarming him and sending him tumbling off the roof below. Standing over the flames, he felt something new settle into his chest. His strength wasn't just training anymore. It was becoming something that could hold an entire line. The attack was repelled, but the academy paid dearly. Gates destroyed, statues shattered, students wounded, and worse. Theo helped carry the injured out of the smoking north wing without a word of complaint. And there, in the smoke, he understood something he'd never fully grasped before. People remember strength, but they remember far more who stood beside them when it mattered. The rector himself came to speak with Theo afterward, gray-haired and stern. You acted faster than the upperclassmen, and faster than half my instructors, the rector said. You've earned a place in the advanced closed-door sessions, he added. Not the end. A new beginning. After the attack, Theo trained harder than ever, understanding now that talent alone wasn't the true target. He had to surpass an entire system that once dismissed him as nothing. Then eliminate the excess, Siren told him one evening, then shatter the foundation underneath it. A good swordsman doesn't answer every move, Siren said. He finds the one solution that breaks it all. Theo rebuilt his own style from the ground up around 4 simple principles. No wasted motion. Break the rhythm the instant confidence sets in. Control the space. Attack the structure, not the strength. Some seniors called it traumatic fencing, and they said it with genuine respect. He didn't teach how to win beautifully. He taught how to survive by breaking an opponent's confidence completely. The academy announced its major interfaculty tournament, and once again, Theo drew Eric Vane. I still hate that you're stronger than me, Eric admitted quietly before the fight. But if I lose, I want to understand why. Then don't be afraid of losing, Theo told him. Be afraid of learning nothing from the fall. The stands were packed. Even the rector attended in person to watch it unfold. Eric opened aggressively, desperate to prove his last defeat had been an accident. Blades clashed again and again, sparks catching the sunlight with every exchange. Theo broke each combination early, shifting his body, cutting the angle, disrupting Eric's timing at the source. He took a cut to his side, another along his forearm, and still refused to slow down. When Eric committed to his final, most confident lunge, Theo answered with something entirely new. He stepped back half a step, caught the blade at its narrowest angle, and redirected it entirely. Eric's own attack came back at him and pinned him flat to the ground. The arena went silent for one full second before it exploded into noise. "How did you become like this?" Eric gasped from the ground, staring up in disbelief. "I trained like I had no other choice," Theo told him, and sheathed his blade. Winning that tournament changed everything about how the academy saw him now. He was no longer a promising underdog. He was a benchmark other students measured themselves against. Yet Theo understood clearly. This was still only the beginning of a much longer road. Standing alone on the rooftop that night, he made himself a quiet promise. "If I become the strongest, I won't let this world abandon a weak the way it abandoned me." Sophomore year arrived, and top students were sent to an outdoor training ground far from any comfort. No flatteriness here. Just rocks, ruins, dangerous creatures, and no rules to hide behind. Theo saw it as opportunity. The harder the ground, the clearer it becomes who's actually ready. "You're smiling like you enjoy this," Eric said, unsure whether to call him rival or threat. "It's not the mud I like," Theo answered. "It's that you can't hide your weakness here." The training zone held an ancient, half-ruined bastion, moss-covered and full of unstable tunnels. "Survive until dawn," the instructor ordered. "Collect the markers. Stay combat ready." This is not just a race. Almost immediately, everything went wrong, exactly as the exercise was designed to unfold. The swamp creatures burst from a side passage, low and fast, fangs bared in the tight corridor. One student panicked and stepped back. The creature lunged straight for his throat. Theo parried it away and severed the tendon in its front leg with one clean strike. "Don't back away," he warned the others sharply. "In a narrow passage, retreat only kills you faster." A second creature tried to flank him. Theo turned and deflected it with the flat of his blade. The training ground was designed to split the groups apart, and it succeeded quickly. A collapsed ceiling cut Theo off with 3 strangers, an archer, a swordsman, and a spearman. "We won't make the checkpoint go in straight," the spearman warned, studying the map. "Then we don't go straight," Theo said. "We take the lower passages, fewer enemies wait down there." That decision saved them time, but it led directly into a new confrontation. Rival students from the School of Charms already held the underground chamber and its markers. "Back off," their leader said coldly. "This area is ours." "There's no point arguing over ground," Theo replied. "Let's just take it instead." In the tight chamber, the spellcaster's own light barriers worked against them, blinding their aim. Theo struck fast, disarming one opponent while the spearman controlled the distance perfectly. When their leader began charging a major spell, Theo saw only one window to act. He closed the distance and struck the base of the casting hand before the spell could finish. The energy dissipated harmlessly into stone. Theo took the marker and walked away without finishing the fight. His style was becoming something bigger than swordsmanship. It was becoming a way to dominate any battlefield. By evening, thick fog rolled in, and every signal light went dark at once. This wasn't weather. It was timing, too convenient to be anything but an ambush. "Someone's coming," Theo said quietly, catching footsteps and the smell of unfamiliar oiled steel. Shadows moved through the fog, adult fighters in gray cloaks, not students at all. A mercenary struck from above, counting on darkness for an edge. Theo deflected it easily. Eric, unexpectedly, covered his back and cut off the second attacker mid-step. "Don't die while I'm here," Eric muttered. "That almost sounds like concern," Theo answered, stepping back. Their leader stepped forward, a man in a gray mask wielding a short, precise blade. "You're the one who's drawn far too much attention to yourself," the masked man said calmly. "Talent is a resource," the man continued. "It can be selected, broken, reshaped, depending on who controls the field. So not just a bandit," Theo said. "An ideologue. If you want to talk, you picked a bad time," Theo added, raising his blade. "People reveal themselves best in the fog," the masked man said, and attacked without warning. His strikes were short, economical, and aimed exactly at the transitions between Theo's stances. This was no ordinary mercenary. This was a master testing him with terrifying precision. "You're growing," the masked man said quietly midway through the exchange. "What do you know about me?" Theo demanded, but got no answer at all. The man stepped back and vanished into the fog, taking his men with him. A strange feeling settled over Theo. This would not be their last meeting. For the first time, someone had looked at him not as an opponent, but as a resource to claim. "You met someone testing your direction, not your technique," Siren said after hearing the story. "Someone is already shaping the path of your future," Siren warned. "The question now is who they want you to become." Before dawn a few days later, Theo climbed the training tower and looked out over the fog-covered field. He thought of the farm, the taunts, the blood, the road, every scar that led him here. "I will not stop until I become the strongest swordsman in this world," he whispered to himself. For the first time, it wasn't a dream, it had become a promise. By his third year, Theo had stopped being a strong student. He'd become a problem for the powerful. Beyond the capital walls lay a world where students rarely traveled, and now they were sending him there. The Academy Council and the Royal Court have agreed on an expedition, Siren announced one morning. Ancient ruins had surfaced on the western border, tied to a sword school lost to the archives entirely. You're on the main group, Siren told him. Not just the list. This is trust with teeth in it. 6 students and 3 instructors set out 3 days later toward the Black Ridge Mountains. Among them was Lyra Vane, Eric's younger sister, precise, quiet, and dangerously observant. Do you really use no magic at all? She asked him during a rest stop. None. If I could, maybe I would, Theo said. I can't do what I don't have. I understand why you've become so strong, Lyra said. Because you have no way out. People without a way out learn faster, she added simply. And it hurts more. On the 3rd day, a pack of stonehounds, silent and armored, ambushed a pack horse without warning. Theo moved before anyone gave an order, cutting the joint of the lead creature's leg. Eric covered the flank. Lyra fired precise arrows of light into weak points from range. Gregor, a heavyweight from the shield faculty, held the creature's back with pure brute endurance. For the first time on this expedition, Theo felt the true value of fighting as a team. If this is just the road, I already want to go home, Gregor joked, catching his breath. Get used to it, Theo told him. Real hikes are always worse than the map suggests. The fortress was called the Hare. A border citadel built before the kingdom was even unified. The air around the ruins felt drawn, too quiet, too heavy, too aware of them. There's residual energy here, Lyra said, pressing her palm to the stone. Something old. Very old. Sword marks scarred the entrance arch, deep, deliberate, and clearly cut by a blade alone. Someone had fought here exactly the way Theo wanted to fight, or better. Inside, faded frescoes showed warriors in ritual duels against each other, not against monsters. An inscription read that the sword serves no one who seeks power, only those willing to pay its price. That line struck Theo harder than any blade ever had, because it was exactly how he lived. In the central hall, stone mannequins stood in a semicircle like an ancient examination chamber. The moment Theo stepped inside the circle, an unfamiliar pressure settled over the whole room. I don't like this, Gregor muttered, and golems began emerging from niches along every wall. These weren't ordinary training constructs. They moved with the coordination of seasoned fighters. This is a random defense, Siren shouted. It's an ancient combat mechanism built to test intruders. Theo struck at joints instead of armor, cracking one golem's knee and dropping it entirely. The remaining golems adjusted their strategy mid-battle, adapting faster than any living opponent he'd faced. If you can learn, then I can learn faster, Theo told himself, and pushed forward harder. A massive central golem joined the fight, wielding a blade nearly twice his own height. Gregor blocked its first strike and still stumbled backward several full steps from the impact. Theo realized the smaller golems were sensing to this one. Break its rhythm, and the whole formation falls. He's not just fighting, Siren murmured from behind a column. He's thinking like an engineer. Small, targeted strikes shifted the golem's balance again and again until it finally overextended. 3 rapid strikes to the neck and shoulder joint, and the massive construct shattered into stone fragments. The silence that followed felt almost sacred, like the whole ruin was holding its breath. In the final chamber, a blackened sword lay on a stone pedestal, ancient and untouched by time. The sword of the founder of the Western School, Siren said quietly. He was thought to be only a legend. Theo lifted the blade and felt something he'd never felt before. Perfect, unfamiliar balance. It suits you, Lyra said softly, watching him test the angle and weight. The moment the sword left its pedestal, the ruins came alive with movement and noise. Armed mercenaries poured through the outer passages, clearly expecting this exact discovery to happen. Ambush, an instructor shouted. And it became painfully clear the expedition had been anticipated from the start. Theo gripped his new blade, and for the first time felt a desire to tear through, not just hold. His new sword sounded different in battle, quieter, cleaner, sharper than anything he'd wielded before. One mercenary tried a magical shield. Theo found the exact seam and shattered the spell instantly. Then a new figure appeared in a plain white mask, watching him like an instrument being appraised. So you found him, the man in the white mask said, his voice calm and unhurried. I am part of an old network preserving blades that shift the balance between nations, he explained. The sword you're holding was never meant for a student, he added. It had another destination. We people who understand the value of the future, the man said, and Theo's grip tightened. If you came to take the sword, then try, Theo said, and the man attacked instantly. His style moved like water, patient and precise, catching every transition between Theo's stances. "You've grown enough to be interesting," the masked man said. "Not enough to understand how the world works." Theo realized the pattern felt familiar. This man fought the same way he liked to fight. So Theo abruptly changed tempo, almost rudely, and stepped straight into the strike as a weapon. The mask wavered. Theo pressed the gap, striking arm, shoulder, torso, breaking the man's entire line. "Remember this, boy," the man said before retreating. "If you keep growing this fast, more than people will hunt you." The expedition returned not in triumph, but in quiet and ease, carrying an ancient sword and a new threat. Someone in the shadows had been watching Theo's growth from the very beginning. "This blade demands absolute honesty from its owner," Siren told him afterward. "It accepts only those willing to pay." "Then this is my sword," Theo said quietly, because he knew exactly how to pay. The academy summoned him to a closed-door council meeting soon after, quiet, serious, and tense. "We believe the Order of the Empty Blades still exists, and it may be watching elite students," the rector said. "There's reason to believe you've become a target, Mr. Rice," the rector added. "Because I'm growing too fast?" Theo asked. "Because you don't fit how they control people," Siren answered. "Then I'll keep getting in their way," Theo said simply. An interfaculty selection was announced for royal demonstrations and international negotiations, and Theo's name appeared again. He was no longer the farm boy proving he could survive. He carried expectations for an entire generation now. "If we ever face off seriously again," Eric said before the tournament, "I don't want to lose the same way." "Then learn not to be afraid of losing," Theo told him. Theo defeated everyone in his path to the finals and faced a master from a foreign embassy. The fight was long and brutal, and his opponent tested every ounce of his endurance. And when the final blow landed, the arena fell silent, marking the end of an entire era. Theo Rice, a farmer's son without magic, now stood as a threat to anyone who inherited power. He knew this was only the next step. Somewhere ahead lay more countries, more orders, worse truths. The story of the world's greatest swordsman was only just beginning to unfold. The international tournament arrived in the border city of Leverus, built for exactly this kind of spectacle. Too many guards, too many crests, too many smiles that never reached the eyes. Theo sensed it immediately. This wasn't sport. It was politics wearing armor. He saw the swordsman of the Furin Empire for the first time, disciplined, austere, terrifyingly efficient. "Are you that country swordsman?" one Furin fighter asked, without a trace of a smile. "If you're asking whether I came here to lose, the answer is no," Theo replied. "I like people who don't lie to themselves," the man said, and nodded once. Ambassadors filled the stands. Advisors wandered the rows. Everyone was watching more than just the matches. If your fight looks too impressive, they see a threat, Theo realized. If it's too weak, they lose respect. "I don't like any of this," Eric admitted quietly beside him. "Me neither," Theo said. "So everything's fine. When a place feels cozy, I'm losing my focus." On the third day, Theo faced a southern knight named Aaron Davil in the main arena. "They say you win without magic," Aaron said, raising his blade. "They say you win with style," Theo answered. Aaron fought with flawless discipline, perfect distance, and calculated precision in every single strike. Theo realized he couldn't break this fight open fast. He'd have to peel it apart, layer by layer. He shifted his breathing and his footwork. Subtle pressure meant to throw off Aaron's internal rhythm. A few minutes later, Aaron frowned for the first time, and that crack was all Theo needed. One step, one turn, one intercept at an awkward angle, and the sword flew from Aaron's hand. "You don't fight like a student," Aaron said, breathing hard. "It's like you knew my mistake in advance." "I didn't know," Theo answered. "I just refused to lose focus." Delegations began discussing Theo openly now, some calling him an anomaly, others a threat to balance itself. "The real game often begins after the high-profile duels," Siren warned him that night. "Stay alert." That night, unable to sleep, Theo saw a familiar figure below in the courtyard. The white mask again. He didn't hesitate. He vaulted the railing and gave chase across the rooftops of the city. The masked man wasn't hiding fully this time. It felt deliberate, almost like an invitation. "So you need me," Theo said, closing the gap without slowing down. On a narrow bridge over the canal, Theo finally forced him to stop and turn around. "Tell me who you are," Theo demanded. "You already know I'm tied to the Order of the Empty Blade. Your style isn't hereditary. Your body isn't magical. Your will isn't broken," the man said. "That makes you dangerous. I came to make sure you're really who I thought you were," the man admitted. "And who is that?" Theo asked. "The man who might one day destroy the whole system," came the answer. He vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Theo alone with a much larger fear taking shape. The next day, a northern delegation invited him to a private training exchange. Unusual but permitted. A girl of about 17 with short dark hair and a thin foil-like blade greeted him. Selena. You're the one they've started calling the peasant's blade, she said. That sounds worse than it should, Theo remarked. Her style moved like music. Every strike a note in a score she read on instinct. You always look for ways to break a rhythm, she said. What if your opponent is built on rhythm itself? Theo realized this wasn't a demonstration. It was a genuine challenge, and he loved it instantly. That evening, Siren arrived with a grim update. Underground tunnels beneath the city held people and weapons. The Order of the Empty Blade was using them to store something they weren't ready to lose. So they're rounding up the fighters they need, Theo said quietly. Then I'll speed things up too. That night, Theo, Lyra, Eric, and Gregor descended through an old drainage shaft beneath the city. The corridors were to clean, the locks to new, the training marks to fresh to ignore. Inside cramped cells sat young fighters and mages, beaten, bound. Some recognizable from the tournament crowd. They're being broken, Lyra whispered, turning pale in the dim light. No, Theo said. They're being sorted, and somehow that felt even worse. In the central hall stood dozens of cloaked figures, and on a raised platform, a man in a heavy white mask. Welcome, Theo Rice, the masked figure said, his voice low and almost friendly. You didn't bring me here by accident, Theo said. Of course not, the man agreed calmly. We wanted to see if you were truly capable of reaching the necessary stage, he said. Necessary for what? Theo asked. For a new era, the figure answered simply. This wasn't a gathering of fanatics. It was an ideology, systemized, patient, and terrifyingly organized. You're not creating order, Theo said. You're creating a market built entirely on fear. Fear is an excellent foundation, the leader replied. People accept a new world faster once the old one is broken. Then I'll break you first, Theo said, and raised his blade. The underground complex became a full defense system, tailored specifically to fight powerful individuals like him. Gregor held off 3 attackers at once while Lyra dispelled the magic trap before it could trigger. Eric fought at Theo's back now, finally free of the pride that once separated them completely. They moved as a team, not a collection of talented strangers, and it carried them all the way through. On the raised platform ahead waited someone else entirely. A gray-haired swordsman with no insignia at all. I've been waiting for you, the old man said. You can call me Master Karen. So you're the boss, Theo said. Not the boss, Karen corrected. Just the one who prepares the transition. You break people, we test them, Theo said. It's almost the same thing. No, Karen said. Testing gives a chance. Breaking is when they no longer need one. Then I'll prove your chance is already over, Theo said, and stepped forward with his blade raised. Karen's technique held no wasted motion at all. Every strike precise enough to feel brutal by itself. You cling too much to control, Karen said, dodging Theo's strike. Your style isn't free yet, and yours is to lifeless, Theo answered. Perhaps, Karen said, but the dead rarely make mistakes. Theo took a wound to the shoulder, then the ribs, then nearly lost his sword entirely. Proper technique doesn't always win, he reminded himself. Sometimes winning takes the willingness to risk everything you have. He broke his own rhythm deliberately, stepping into a strike as if inviting the danger to land. Karen hesitated for one fraction of a second, and that was all the opening Theo needed. Wrist, elbow, shoulder line, disrupting not the body but the entire pattern of his movement. Karen stepped back for the first time in the fight, and Theo pressed his blade to his throat. Now you're really interesting, Karen said calmly, even with the sword against his neck. Behind him, the man in the white mask stepped forward at last, his identity finally clear. Enough, the white mask said. You've passed part of the test. It was monstrous. They had staged captivity, ambush, and slaughter purely to measure his growth. You're crazy, Eric shouted, arriving in time to hear the end of the confession. We simply don't believe in a world where weakness forgives itself, Karen replied without shame. Then I'll show you a world where strength can't be bought through violence, Theo said. He no longer wanted to win. He wanted this order to never see him as an experiment again. For the first time, Theo assembled his ultimate technique, a style forged from every victory and every failure. The slash of the limit relied on neither speed nor strength alone, but on perfect timing and rhythm. He stepped forward. Karen moved to meet him, and then it all happened almost simultaneously. Theo broke the opening line, sliced through Karen's entire attack structure, and disarmed him completely. The blade hit the stone floor, and the sound rang out like the end of an era. So this is it, the true limit, Karen said quietly, staring at his own empty palm. Theo stood there breathing hard, no smile, no arrogance, only exhaustion and a hard-earned clarity. After Karen's fall, The Order of the Empty Blade began collapsing from the inside out. Some fighters surrendered on the spot, others fled. Guards Theo had summoned closed in on the rest. The complex was seized, the prisoners freed, and the evidence handed straight to the crown. Yet Theo felt no relief in victory. He had seen too many people broken to feel joy now. "You've won," Lyra said quietly, standing beside him in the ruined hall. "No," Theo said. "I just stopped them here." "Isn't that enough?" she asked. "As long as the world lets people like this rise again, it's not enough," he answered. His return to Leverus was no longer ordinary. He was now called one of the strongest young swordsmen alive. Even those who once mocked his peasant origins were talking about him with grudging respect now. People began studying his style, analyzing his fights, using his name as a new benchmark entirely. Yet Theo climbed back to the academy's rooftop with new scars, in no hurry to bask in glory. "You've done what many fail to do in a lifetime," Siren told him, joining him at the railing. "But now comes the hardest part," Siren warned. "Not to lose yourself once you truly become the strongest." Theo gazed out at the horizon, knowing this would be harder than any battle he'd survived. But he was ready for that too, because the path of the strongest was never a road to glory. It was a road to responsibility, and he intended to walk every step of it. Back at the academy, life didn't slow down. It sharpened, the way a blade does under pressure. New instructors arrived, curious about the farm boy who had broken an entire secret order alone. Some tried to recruit him for royal guard positions before he'd even finished his own training. Theo declined every offer politely. He wasn't finished becoming what he set out to become. Eric, once his loudest rival, had become something closer to a brother forged through violence. "We're not friends," Eric said one evening, half joking. "We just happen to survive things together." "That's the only kind of friendship that ever mattered to me," Theo answered honestly. Lyra kept her distance, but her respect showed in small ways: a nod, a warning, a shared glance. Gregor, meanwhile, had started copying Theo's training schedule, waking earlier than he ever thought he could. "If a farm boy can do it, a shield knight can survive it too," he grumbled through the pain. Word of Karen's defeat reached the royal court within days, carried by frightened, relieved officials. The king himself requested a private audience with the boy who had unraveled an ancient conspiracy. Theo stood in the throne room, plain clothes among silk and gold, exactly as he'd always been. "You could have died down there," the king said. "You could have let someone else handle it." "Someone else wasn't there," Theo answered simply. "So it had to be me." The king studied him a long moment, then offered him a title he never expected to hear. Royal Blade of the Crown, a position reserved for warriors who defend the kingdom directly. Theo hesitated. Titles meant obligations, and obligations meant a leash he'd never worn before. "I'll accept," he finally said, "on one condition. I choose which battles I fight, and why." The king, surprised by the boldness, agreed anyway, sensing something rare standing in front of him. With the title came new enemies, quieter ones, born from politics rather than open combat. Nobles who had mocked him for years now smiled to his face while plotting behind closed doors. Some spread rumors that his victories were staged, that the order had let him win for show. Theo ignored it the way he'd ignored every insult since childhood. Noise was still just noise. But one rumor cut differently, whispers that his rise had been engineered from the very start. He confronted Siren directly one night, demanding the truth without softening the question at all. "Did the academy know about the order before I ever arrived?" he asked flatly. Siren didn't flinch. "We suspected," he admitted. "We didn't know how deep it ran until you found it." "So I was bait," Theo said, his voice low and dangerous. "You were an opportunity," Siren corrected. "One we hoped would survive long enough to matter." That honesty stung more than a lie would have, but Theo respected it more too. "I would have gone in anyway," he finally said, "just would have liked to know the stakes." From that day, Theo trusted the academy a little less, and himself a little more. Months passed, peace settled over the kingdom, thin and fragile like ice over deep water. Then reports arrived of raids along the eastern border, coordinated, brutal, and eerily familiar in style. The empty blade insignia had been spotted again, carved into the ruins of a burned village. The order wasn't finished. It had only gone quiet, regrouping somewhere beyond the crown's reach. Theo volunteered before the council even finished discussing who to send. "This isn't your war alone," the rector warned him. "It never was," Theo replied. "But I started ending it." He assembled a smaller team this time: Eric, Lyra, Gregor, and two royal scouts familiar with the eastern roads. The journey east took 2 weeks through terrain far harsher than the academy's training grounds. Villages along the way told the same story: masked men, sudden violence, and fighters who vanished afterward. "They're still recruiting," Lyra said grimly, studying a burn watchtower. or still hunting for someone specific? Theo suspected he already knew who that someone was. Himself. Unfinished business from Karen's fall. On the 9th night, they found the source, a fortified camp hidden deep in a ravine. Guards patrolled in disciplined rotations, far too organized for simple bandits or scattered survivors. This is a rebuilding operation, Eric whispered, counting the fires below. Not remnants, a revival. Theo led them down under cover of darkness, moving exactly the way Gar had taught him years ago. Silent, patient, strike only when the outcome is already decided before the blade moves. They took the outer guards without raising an alarm, one clean strike after another in the dark. Inside the central tent, they found not weapons, but ledgers, names, locations, and a growing list of targets. Theo's name appeared on that list more times than any other, underlined in a hand he recognized. The White Mask, Theo said quietly. He's still alive, and he's still building something. A scout burst in moments later. The camp's true leader had already fled toward the coast. They gave chase through the night, the terrain growing rockier and more treacherous with every mile. At dawn, they cornered him at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea, nowhere left to run. It was him, the White Mask, still calm, still watching Theo like an unfinished project. You came all this way just to find me, he said, almost amused by the effort. I came to finish what Karen started, Theo answered, and to make sure it stays finished. The order doesn't die with one man, the masked figure said. Not even with two. Then I'll keep coming back until there's nothing left of it to rebuild, Theo said. The White Mask drew his blade, and this time there was no more testing in his movements. This was a man fighting for survival, and that made him more dangerous than ever before. Their blades met in a blur of motion, faster than anything Theo had faced since Karen himself. He struck at transitions exactly as before, hunting for the same gap he'd found on the bridge. But Theo had grown since that night, and his rhythm no longer had the same gap to exploit. You've closed the door I used to walk through, the man admitted, stepping back for the first time. Then find another door, Theo said, and press the attack without mercy or hesitation. The fight drove them dangerously close to the cliff's edge, wind howling off the sea below. One misstep now, and either of them could fall into the rocks and water below. Theo forced a final exchange, reading the angle exactly as he'd read Karen's final mistake. The White Mask overcommitted by half a step, and Theo's blade found the opening at last. The sword flew from his hand, spinning off the cliff edge into the churning water below. The man stood there disarmed, staring at the sea instead of the boy who had beaten him. It's over, Theo said. Surrender, and this ends without more blood on either side. The masked man laughed, quiet and hollow. You still think this is about winning, he said. Before Theo could answer, the man stepped backward off the cliff without a single word of warning. Theo lunged for him, too late, catching only empty air where a hand had been. He stared down at the waves for a long moment, feeling neither victory nor relief. Some enemies don't want to be defeated. They only want to disappear on their own terms. The camp was dismantled, the ledgers seized, and the names inside handed over to the crown for protection. But the White Mask's body was never recovered from the waves below the cliff. He might be dead, Eric said on the journey home, or he might just be waiting somewhere. Either way, Theo said, we keep watching. That's the only ending that makes sense now. Word of the Eastern campaign reached the capital before they did, growing larger with every telling. By the time Theo returned, crowds had gathered outside the academy gates just to see him pass. He hated the attention, but he understood its value. Hope needed a face people could believe in. The rector offered him a formal ceremony. Theo declined, asking instead for a single quiet request. Send resources to the villages burned along the eastern road, he said. That's the only reward I want. The rector, surprised, agreed without argument, recognizing something rare in a request like that. That evening, Siren found him again on the training rooftop, exactly where their conversations always seemed to happen. You could have asked for gold, land, a title with real power behind it, Siren said. I already have the only thing I actually wanted, Theo answered. The strength to matter. Siren studied him for a long moment, then smiled the way a proud teacher rarely allows himself to. You've become something this academy didn't expect to produce, he admitted quietly. Months turned into a new season, and the academy prepared for its grandest event yet, the Continental Trials. Every kingdom, every school, every order sent its finest to compete on neutral ground. This wasn't diplomacy dressed as sport anymore. This was every major power measuring its future rivals directly. Theo represented the academy, but everyone understood he now represented something larger than any single school. He was proof that magic wasn't the only path to greatness, and that unsettled a lot of powerful people. Selena of Frun arrived again, her rhythm sharpened even further since their last private exchange. I've been waiting for a real match, she said, drawing her thin, foil-like blade. This time, there would be no exhibition, no private courtyard, just the full weight of the trials. Their fight became the most discussed match of the entire tournament before it even began. Selena moved like a melody, every strike connected to the last in a pattern Theo had to decode live. He countered not by matching her rhythm, but by refusing to follow any rhythm at all. You're not fighting my music, she said, breathing hard. You're fighting the silence between the notes. Exactly, Theo answered, and drove the final strike through the gap her rhythm left exposed. Selena went down on one knee, smiling despite the loss. Now that was a real fight. Their match became legend across the kingdoms, discussed by strategists who had never held a sword. But the trials held more than glory. They held danger disguised as competition. Exactly like Lever's before. Whispers returned of the order regrouping under new leadership, using the trials as cover once again. Theo felt it before he saw it, a familiar tension coiling tight in the air around the arena. Something is happening here, he told Siren quietly. Something bigger than a tournament. And on the final night, it finally revealed itself, exactly when no one expected it to. Explosions tore through the outer stands as masked fighters stormed the arena grounds directly. This wasn't a raid anymore. This was a declaration, aimed straight at everything Theo had built. A new leader emerged from the chaos, younger than Karen, faster than the White Mask ever was. I am what remains when you cut down the old order, the man announced, drawing twin blades. You keep destroying our leadership, he said. So we stopped relying on just one. Theo stepped forward without hesitation, feeling every eye in the burning arena, then on him at once. Then I'll destroy however many of you it takes, he said, raising his blackened sword. The new leader moved with a hybrid style, part Karen's precision, part the white masked fluid deception. He had studied both of Theo's greatest victories, and built something meant specifically to counter them. Clever, Theo admitted, pairing a combination that borrowed directly from his own past battles. Flattery won't save you, the leader said, pressing forward with renewed, calculated aggression. Eric, Lyra, and Gregor held the perimeter, keeping the chaos from spilling into the panicked crowd. Theo fought alone in the center, exactly where this new leader wanted him, isolated and exposed. This man wasn't testing him like the others had. He was hunting him with calculated intent. You think copying to masters makes you stronger than either one, Theo said, absorbing a heavy blow. It makes me unpredictable, the leader answered, shifting stance mid-strike without warning. Theo felt the pressure building, different from Karen's coldness, different from the White Mask's patience. This felt personal, driven by something raw beneath the calculated technique. You lost someone, Theo realized suddenly. This isn't ideology anymore. This is grief wearing a system. The leader's mask cracked slightly at that, just enough to confirm the accusation had landed true. Karen was the only one who ever saw value in me, the man admitted through gritted teeth. Then you're fighting for a dead man's approval, Theo said. That's not strength. That's a cage. Rage broke the leader's discipline for one crucial second, and Theo was already moving. He closed the distance, disrupted both borrowed styles at once, and found the seam between them. One strike, precise and merciless, disarmed both blades at the exact same instant. The leader dropped to his knees, breathing hard, staring at empty hands for the second time in his life. Finish it, the man said bitterly. Prove the order was right about how this world works. No, Theo said, lowering his blade. Killing you proves nothing except that I've become like Karen. Instead, he offered a hand, the same way no one had ever offered him one back on the farm. The leader stared at it, confused, furious, and something else he couldn't quite name yet. Grief doesn't need a system to survive, Theo said. It just needs somewhere honest to go. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader disarmed and spared, hesitated, then slowly began surrendering their weapons. The Continental Trials ended not with a champion's celebration, but with the quiet collapse of an old evil. News of the mercy spread faster than news of any victory ever had before. Some called it weakness. Most called it the first real sign the Order's ideology had actually lost. You could have ended it permanently, Eric said afterward, still catching his breath from the chaos. I did end it, Theo replied, just not the way they expected strength to look. The captured leader was placed under royal supervision, not execution, a decision that divided the court sharply. Theo argued for it personally, standing before nobles who once called him nothing but a peasant. People aren't born into cruelty, he told them. They're built into it, and they can be unbuilt too. The council relented, reluctantly, recognizing the strange authority Theo now carried in every room he entered. That night, standing again on the familiar rooftop, Theo finally let himself feel something like peace. Siren joined him, silent for a long while before finally speaking. You didn't become Karen. I almost did, Theo admitted. Every step of this fight, I felt how easy that would have been. That's exactly why you didn't, Siren said. Karen never noticed the danger. You always did. Word of the trials reached every kingdom on the continent within days, reshaping how they viewed him. He was no longer just a swordsman without magic. He was proof that mercy could be a weapon too. Nobles who mocked him years ago now sent formal letters requesting audiences and alliances. Theo answered few of them personally, choosing instead to return to the training ground where it all began. The academy had changed around him. New students, new instructors, new rivalries forming in the same hallways. Some of them looked at him the way he once looked at legends, with disbelief and hunger both. A young student, no different from Theo years earlier, approached him nervously by the weapons rack. Is it true you had no magic at all when you started? The boy asked quietly. None, Theo said. Not a spark of it. The boy's face fell slightly at the answer. Then how did you become the strongest swordsman in the world? The boy pressed. I didn't become the strongest by having something others didn't, Theo said. I became strongest by refusing to stop. The boy's eyes changed at that. The same stubborn light Theo remembered from his own reflection years ago. Theo placed a hand on his shoulder, the same weight Gar had once placed on his own. Wake up 2 hours before dawn, he said, and never let the pain decide when you quit. The boy nodded, and Theo watched him walk away, already planning his first sunrise run. Spring came to the kingdom of Arvale quieter than any season Theo could remember in years. No raids, no mass leaders, no urgent scrolls waiting on his desk at dawn. For the first time since his rebirth, he allowed himself to simply exist without a battle ahead. He visited his father's farm, older now, the fields still tended by careful, familiar hands. He came back, his father said, standing at the gate exactly where he'd said goodbye years earlier. I always meant to, Theo answered, and for a moment he was just a son again, not a legend. His father studied him, the scars, the sword, the calm that hadn't existed in that same body before. They say you're the strongest swordsman alive now, his father said quietly. Is that true? I don't know if I'm the strongest, Theo admitted. I know I never stopped trying to become better. That answer seemed to satisfy his father, more than any title ever could have. Gar, the one-armed veteran who started it all, still lived at the edge of the village. You look tired for someone who supposedly conquered secret orders and cliffside masters, Gar joked, gripping his shoulder. I earned every bit of this tired, Theo said, and for the first time in years he laughed easily. The academy sent word that his old rooftop room remained untouched, waiting for whenever he chose to return. He knew he would go back not out of obligation, but because the next generation still needed someone. Eric had begun training younger students personally, patient in a way no one expected from him. Lyra worked quietly with Royal Scouts, applying the same precision she'd always carried into every fight. Gregor, of all people, had been offered a teaching post for entrance training at the academy itself. They had all changed, shaped by the same fires that forged Theo into who he'd become. The Order of the Empty Blade never fully vanished, scattered fragments still whispering in the dark corners. But it no longer moved like a shadow no one could name. Now it had a face, and a lesson. Strength built on fear eventually meets strength built on something it can't calculate, mercy included. Theo understood that better than anyone else alive, because he had lived both sides of that lesson. He thought often of the boy at the weapons rack, and the thousands like him still to come. Some would have magic, some wouldn't. The difference mattered less than what they chose to do with nothing. On a quiet evening, Siren visited the farm unannounced, carrying a scroll bearing the royal seal. The crown wants to formalize a new academy program, Siren explained. One built around your principles specifically. Teaching what? Theo asked. That talent is a gift, Siren said. But discipline is a choice anyone can make. Theo studied the scroll for a long moment before finally nodding once, quietly, without ceremony. I'll teach, he said, but only students willing to fail publicly before they ever succeed. Those are the only ones worth teaching anyway, Siren agreed, and the two of them shook on it. The new program opened its doors that autumn, small at first, built from stubbornness rather than prestige. Its first class included farm children, orphaned refugees, and a handful of nobles curious about real struggle. Theo trained them the way Gar had trained him, without mercy for excuses, full of respect for effort. Some cried in the mud, some quit within the first week. A few stayed no matter how hard it got. Those few reminded him of exactly who he used to be, standing alone in a village square. Years from now, some of them would carry swords into battles Theo would never witness himself. That thought didn't frighten him anymore. It felt like the entire point of everything he'd survived. The kingdom itself began to shift slowly, magic still respected, but no longer treated as the only worth. Children without a magic course stopped being called empty in quite the same casual, cruel way. It wasn't a revolution overnight. It was a slow correction, one stubborn student at a time. Theo never claimed credit for the shift. He simply kept showing up before dawn, every single day. On the anniversary of his rebirth, a day only he ever truly remembered, he climbed the old training tower. Fog spread below just as it had years earlier, and for a moment the past felt close enough to touch. He thought of the cold sidewalk, the icy sky, and the regret that had once defined his final breath. That regret no longer existed anywhere inside him. He had spent every ounce of it into this new life. Somewhere below, a new student was already awake, running laps in the gray pre-dawn light alone. Theo watched him for a moment, remembering exactly how heavy that first sack of stones had felt. He didn't call out, he simply let the boy earn his own version of that same silence. The world still held danger, hidden orders, ambitious masters, and secrets buried deeper than any ruin. But Theo no longer feared what came next, because fear had stopped being useful to him years ago. He understood now that the strongest swordsman was never the one who ended every threat forever. It was the one who kept walking forward, generation after generation, without losing what made him human. Word arrived that the young leader he'd spared was slowly rebuilding a life outside the Order's shadow. He'd taken up smithing, of all things, forging blades instead of wielding them against strangers. Theo visited him once, quietly, without announcement, and found a man finally free of borrowed rage. "You spared me for this," the former leader asked, gesturing at his modest forge and quiet life. "I spared you for whatever came next," Theo answered. "This just happens to be a good one." The man nodded, and something in his shoulders eased that hadn't eased in years. Theo left without asking for thanks, because gratitude had never been the reason he did any of it. Back at the academy, his new students continued to grow, stubborn and raw and painfully honest. One girl, magicless like him, reminded Theo so sharply of himself that it nearly stopped his breath. "They call me empty too," she admitted one evening, staring at her own calloused, bleeding palms. "Then make them regret ever using that word around you," Theo told her, and meant every syllable. She trained harder after that than any student he had ever pushed before, chasing something only she understood. Watching her reminded Theo that his story wasn't really about magic, or its absence, at all. It was about refusing a label the world tried to force onto someone, before they'd even chosen anything. The seasons turned again, and the kingdom of Arvale settled into something resembling lasting peace. Not perfect peace, never that, but peace strong enough to let ordinary lives breathe without constant threat. Theo Rice, once the boy with no magic core, now stood as living proof that labels lie. He had been called empty, useless, a peasant playing at greatness he could never actually reach. Every single one of those words had been wrong, and he had spent his whole life proving it. Not through inherited talent, not through luck, but through relentless, unglamorous, exhausting daily effort. That was the truth Siren had tried to warn him about from the very beginning. Strength without humility becomes a weapon of revenge. Strength with humility becomes something worth following. Theo had chosen the harder path every single time it mattered, and it had cost him plenty. Scars across his shoulder, his ribs, his forearm, each one a receipt for a lesson learned in blood. But none of those scars ever took more from him than they gave back in the end. On his final evening at the academy that year, he gathered his students on the training ground at dusk. "You'll fail here," he told them plainly. "Some of you will fail often, and it will hurt. But failure isn't the opposite of strength," he continued. "It's the only honest path toward it. I had no magic, no name, no advantage the world respected when I started this journey. What I had was the refusal to accept that nothing was all I would ever have. Some of you have magic, some of you don't. Neither one decides who you'll become. Only the hours you're willing to spend before anyone else is awake decide that." His students listened in silence. The same silence he remembered from that awful ritual day at 7 years old. But this silence felt different, full of possibility instead of judgment. And that difference meant everything. Theo looked out over their tired, determined faces and saw echoes of every version of himself. The farm boy, the traveler, the student, the swordsman, the teacher standing here right now. Each version had been necessary, and none of them had been given anything for free. He thought briefly of his first death, the ice, the curb, the regret that had followed him into rebirth. That regret had asked one simple question. Had he ever done anything truly great with his life? Standing here now, surrounded by students who might carry this lesson forward for generations, he finally had an answer. Greatness was never a single moment, a single victory, or a single legendary duel. It was 1,000 small mornings nobody witnessed, repeated until the world had no choice but to notice. He raised his blackened sword one final time that evening, catching the last light of the setting sun. This blade demanded honesty from its wielder, and honesty was the one thing he'd never withheld from it. Somewhere far below, The academy bells rang out, marking the end of another extraordinary day. Theo Rice, once the boy with no magic core, closed his eyes and simply breathed it all in. He had built a legend not from what the world gave him, but from what he refused to accept. And in doing so, he had rewritten what strength was even allowed to mean in this world. Not inherited, not granted, not decided by a silent priest in a failed ritual at 7 years old. Earned one brutal morning at a time, until earning it became simply who he was. The students below began their evening drills, sloppy, exhausted, and utterly unwilling to quit just yet. Theo smiled, quiet and genuine, watching the same stubborn fire he once carried now burning in someone else. He turned from the railing and walked back down toward them, ready to correct every mistake with patience. Because that was the real ending to his story, not a final battle, but a passed torch. The strongest swordsman the world had ever seen was no longer measured by duels alone. He was measured by how many people he taught to stop believing they were empty. Theo Rice had died once, quietly, without meaning, on a cold and forgotten sidewalk. He lived the second time loud enough that an entire kingdom would remember his name for centuries. Not because he was chosen, not because fate favored him, but because he simply refused to stop. That refusal became a sword sharper than any blade forged from ancient, blackened steel. And it became a legacy passed forward into hands that had never once held a weapon before. The fog rolled over the training grounds one final time, soft, familiar, and no longer frightening at all. Theo stepped into it the way he always had, calm, certain, and completely unafraid of what came next. His story had begun with nothing but stubbornness against an entire world built on magic. It ended with an entire world finally understanding that stubbornness could be its own kind of magic. Theo Rice, the swordsman without magic, had become exactly what he swore he would become. The strongest swordsman the world had ever known, and the man who taught it that strength is earned,